BMW Motorcycle Owners of America present the Short Wheelbase Podcast. With members in all 50 states, Canada, and across the globe, the BMW MOA invites you to ride inspired. Learn more about membership benefits, including roadside assistance, tire hazard protection, and more at bmwmoa.org. The Short Wheelbase Podcast is also brought to you by Boxer 2 Valve, supplier of quality OEM and aftermarket parts and specialty tools, and by Air Support BMW, offering premium driveline rebuilding and performance enhancements for your air-cooled BMW.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the episode 8 of the Short Wheelbase Podcast. We have Darren. I'm Nick. We're going to go over our garage updates as always. We are going to feature a Survivor Series bike that Darren dug up. It's a beautiful 84 R100S to continue our series of S bikes that we've been talking about lately.
We have, yes.
How you doing, Darren, before we jump into the garage updates?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you, Nick. Winter time just around the corner on the calendar. We got a bunch of rain here in Arkansas the other night, so the South Sycamore Creek excuse me, we had a quick little flood, flash flood, so to speak. So I had to plow through some muddy water, and I'm used to it. I get washed off the bridge just a little bit and go into the gravel barn. I'm used to it. To get into the house last night, if you saw me do it and had no idea what was going on, your heart would jump up in your throat and it'd be like, what the hell is he doing? So that's kind of what's been going on here the past few days.
Nice. Well, it's been warm here. We had that brief snowstorm a few weeks back, a couple episodes back, and it's pretty much been 50s and 60s since then. So
perfect.
All the work that I've been planning on doing, I just keep putting off because I can ride the bike.
That's nice.
Which leads me to my garage update. I have been riding it some, but as I alluded to last week, my starter is very tired, and I rolled out of here last weekend. I think it was Saturday or Sunday morning, and it was probably about 32 degrees ambient temperature in my garage, maybe a little warmer outside. And sure enough, starter wouldn't get going. So I tried to use the roll down the hill and roll start it trick, and got to the bottom of the hill and it wouldn't start. I think we're losing you, Darren.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was an internet blip on my end. We should be good.
All right. Well, I got you back.
Good to go now. My apologies.
Cool. No worries. But yeah, got to the bottom of the hill trying to roll start it after the starter basically drained my battery, and still couldn't get it to start.
Now, don't you have a Kickstarter on that?
I do. I stood there for a good 15 minutes kickstarting it at the bottom of the hill.
Really? It didn't, and it wouldn't fire?
Yeah, it just would not fire. Thankfully, I have a buddy that lives down at the bottom of the hill, and he was home, so I got him to come out with he had one of those little jump start packs, and he got me going, and he offered to give me the jump start pack because I told him I was still going to go for my ride. He thought for sure I was just going to ride back up the hill and park the bike, and so he's like, here, take this. And I said, no, it'll be fine. And so I went out for my ride. I did a ride up the canyon and came back and stopped for coffee, and it almost didn't start outside the coffee shop.
Did you try the Kickstarter then?
I did. I kickstarted it a few times first just to kind of get things moving, and then I was able to hit it with the starter, and it went, but it was struggling.
Close.
So
okay. All right.
I'm calling it. I got to do the starter. On top of it, the front brake was starting to squeal on me a little bit towards the end of the ride. I knew those pads were at the end of their life, but they had enough to get me going for a while. So I've got fresh pad material, the old /2. I got to actually rivet those on.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that's a whole new adventure I've never embarked on. So
that's right. I forgot.
I'll try to maybe take some pictures of that process and post them here next time or whenever I get to it.
Yeah, that's right. So your conversion is just engine only.
Yeah, it's pretty much /2 everywhere else. Yeah, and some of the electronics are off the /5, the R75/5.
But the front wheel is still a /2. Okay, I didn't realize
that.
All right, good. That's a good report, and I'm glad you didn't get stranded.
It was close. So I hear there's big news going on in your garage these days.
Lots going on, Nick. It's kind of two bikes simultaneously, although one is just on a shelf. So I think we're going to scroll through some photos here as I'm talking about it. What just arrived last week in 17 boxes, different containers, I guess, was a 1977 R100S. Courtesy of a gentleman called Aaron Rangel or Rangel. I'm not sure of the pronunciation. And the story behind this is back in June, I woke up one morning, saw, and I might have mentioned this in the podcast already somewhere else, but just to refresh the story, I saw an ad. I think it was on the MOA or Airheads listing. It said free 77 R100S. And I mean, I called immediately, obviously.
Yeah. I think you called me immediately after.
Oh, I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I sure did. Free. I mean, for crying out loud. So anyway, the guy had taken the bike apart years ago, never got around to putting it back together. He was moving back to the Philippines. He might be Filipino. I didn't quite get a take on it. Anyway, I said, look, I'm free. Yeah, let me give you some money, $500 for the bike anyway, and I'll pay to get it shipped out here. So it finally arrived. It took a while because the shipper said, hey, this is going to take up twice or three times the amount of what a one motorcycle would in my trailer. I'll do it for $1,000, but you'd need to be patient. Okay?
Right.
No problem. Anyway, so it arrives. And Nick, you should have seen it. It was like Christmas morning in the garage. It was just paper flying everywhere, and boxes half open. And so some of the pictures you're seeing here, really, let me just say this: all the components to the bike are there. The one thing I was most concerned about was the paint. So we'll take a look at a few pictures here of the tank, side covers, seat cowl, and front fender. And all those are good. Considering This bike had 32,000 miles. This is some of the better condition metallic red paint from 1977 I've seen. Unfortunately, I did not take a picture of the fairing because either the guy I got the bike from or the previous owner decided to repaint the fairing. But in essence, what they said was, something in red will be fine. Just kind of freestyle it. And so it's like this maroon color with a thick gold pinstripe. It has nothing to do with the paint color of the bike. So I've got another S fairing from my bike, the S that I have. So I'll be able to piece this together somehow, Nick. It'll be a struggle. Don't cry for me, Argentina. But I'll be able to get it back together. All that to say, this is going to be a project that we're going to document here somewhat, maybe with some video and also on the podcast going forward. And I think we've talked about it. The idea here is going to be kind of a community build. So who knows, Nick, I may send you some carburetors to rebuild for part of the project here.
Send them over. I'd be happy to.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing I do, the other thing I'll mention real quickly is I have this, so I've got two 77 R100S bikes right now. And so I may be putting the one I have currently up for sale. So if anybody's in the market for a 77S, keep your eye out on the Facebook page or elsewhere, in the ads or something like that, or just drop me a line, whatever, and let me know. I haven't made a decision yet, but it may be going up on the market. May not. I don't know. So just a heads up for anybody out there who might be looking.
Gotcha. Very cool. What I was going to ask earlier is, you said it was 32,000 miles. Did he give you any reason for why he took it completely apart?
That is a good question. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking to him on the phone, a couple conversations. Apparently he bought the bike, did some things to it. He didn't strike me as somebody who was really well-versed in airheads or motorcycles necessarily. He said he got the bike back together. It was running fine. He had ridden it for 6 or 7 months. but he wanted to take it back down to zero and rebuild it up. So he said when the bike was taken apart, it was running and running fine, apparently. Now, what that means to him and to me or you, fine is a relative term.
Right.
But it's, yeah. And a couple of the neat things that came with that were kind of a bonus. I think I mentioned this to you. It's got a Nip and Denso starter from
cool.
Motor Rod Electric. He bought a new pair of Icon shocks and a full stainless steel bolt kit from the Bolt Guy.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of him?
I have. He's on eBay, right?
Maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I've always wanted to buy one of those kits, but I've never had a bike fully apart where I thought, this is the right thing to do.
I went through all the envelopes and little bags. I didn't open them all up, but I just sort of looked at each one and saw what was in there. And so looks like a pretty thorough, well put together kit. So
nice.
Eventually I'll find out if it's all there. And then as far as the green bike goes, the green machine resealed the top end, new push rod, tube seals, gaskets, all that kind of stuff, buttoned that back up over the weekend. So moving on to rear main seal, oil pump, get the transmission out and start working my way back. So nice. Far, so good with that.
Good. So no surprises when you pulled the cylinders off that bike?
No. In fact, a little bit of carbon, nothing out of the ordinary or unusual.
Right.
Just used a little bit of cleaner and a soft brass brush to clean it up a little bit. Everything else looked fine. Zero surprises, which was nice.
Yeah.
Every time I do something on this bike, there's another surprise, something not expected. But in this case, pretty straightforward. Everything's looking good. So I'm confident I'm going to have this bike ready. I've got a trip planned down to Big Bend in Terlingua, Texas later this winter. So hopefully it'll be all buttoned up and back together, tootling around South Texas.
Cool. Sounds awesome.
Yes.
Cool. Let's see here. That's quite a bit. You did have a lot.
That's a lot, yes. And now with two bikes in there, we're going to have a lot of garage updates going forward.
I know. I got to get myself in gear here so I can at least contribute more.
Well, you've got the Box O bike, don't you too?
I do. I have the Box O bike as well, which, I got to get moving on that. It's hard, and maybe this already with having a Box O bike at this point, but sometimes you get them so neatly up on that shelf that they just kind of stay there.
Well, in my case, I've got the /6 on the lift. So as soon as that comes down off the lift and I'm riding it, I'm gonna get the 77S up there again. The other nice thing is, I've come across a few things I've needed for the green machine. Mm-hmm. And turns out I've got some parts I can rob from the 77S, which is come in handy. So I've just got a little notebook of things I've taken out, some bolts and, a tail light, a couple other things I wanted to use. So that's nice when you're working on bikes such close era and time frame, even BMWs in general. It's nice to be able to rob Peter to pay Paul in that circumstance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I'm honest, the starter I have sitting here on the shelf that I'm putting on the conversion was one that I bought for the Box O bike.
There you go.
But they're both the same starter. So it's like, well, I'll just steal that for now. I don't need the starter for the bike that is in 20 pieces.
What is the plan? It's a /6 R90.
An R90 /6. Yeah.
What's the plan?
The plan originally was to build, some kind of mild scrambler. Mm-hmm. I really want to go and do the vintage 1000 ride. So that was kind of my plan for that bike. We'll see if that's exactly what happens. I was hoping to ride in that in 2025. But I think some other plans that you and I have in the works are going to put that on hold for maybe another year.
And what's the condition of the paint and bodywork?
Well, it didn't come with a whole lot of the body work. It came with a mismatched pile of fenders. It came with a /7 style tank, which I traded Pokey Parmage for a /6 tank, which actually
that's
it's
it
that
back
one,
there.
right?
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah,
There it is.
Mhm.
So that one's usable, especially for a bike that I was planning to, be an off-road bike. I don't need it to be pristine. It's going to get scratched and bumped and dented. So, and I have a Solo, the police Solo seat,
good.
which I traded for at my tech day. And just to make things more difficult for myself, I traded a few parts to get a /5 style headlight nacelle so that I can do a /5 style Speedo, because I just love the /5 and the /2 style.
Yeah, I don't want to try to wrap
Speedo.
my head around that just yet. So good luck.
Yeah,
Good luck.
it's going to be a challenge. I know it's documented on ADV Rider, but I haven't seen that thread in probably 5 years. So we'll see.
Okay. All right. We'll see how that goes.
I may be screaming, "Hey, who's got a /6 Speedo for me?"
Yeah, right.
But hey, sometimes a trade comes along, and it was a good deal at the time, and I thought, well, it'd look really cool with that on there.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with stockpiling parts. I mean, you've got a loose idea what you want to do with the bike, and things come up. Grab them, stash them, put them on the shelf, whatever. So you've got some options when you get there, and also, I think in some way, will kind of help the creative process as you're getting that motorcycle together.
Yeah,
just looking and saying, okay, I got this. What can I do? So you'll be able to get some ideas rolling around in the noggin up there.
Yeah, I think what I want to do, hopefully in the next few months here, is step one would be, I've got some great hubs for it. I'd like to go get wheels built down at Woody's, because he's they're right down the road here. Because I really just want to get wheels on the frame and get it into a roller form so I can put it up on the lift and just start visualizing it, because right now it's just in so many pieces, it's hard to even wrap my head around what to do with it.
Yeah. Once you've got a roller frame on the lift, I think things will start to pick up.
For sure. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Good.
Cool. Well, moving right along, we've got Survivor Series this week, and that bike is the bike I mentioned earlier, which is Chip Walter's 84 R100S Last Edition.
California. That's right.
Well, I'll let you take it away, because you know the details on this bike.
Yeah,
get some pictures up here.
It's an interesting bike. So the conversation I had with Chip, aka Big Wally, if you're on Adventure Rider, going back a few years on this. We haven't aired it on the podcast, and as a good radio/podcast producer, I'm always doing interviews, collecting content, and not using it all the time. So this one has been in the vault, so to speak. And I talked with Chip, aka Big Wally, a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, we're digging this out of mothballs, and went back and listened to it. First of all, it's a great interview. We get to hear about his experience buying it on Bring a Trailer and the unique sort of limited edition this bike truly is. We all know the whole last edition story. For those who don't, in 1984, BMW was anticipating the end of the Boxer era with the introduction of the K-bike. Out came the last edition. We use those quotes. R100 RS, right? Was it just the RS?
They did an RT as well.
RT, okay, thank you. Anyway, and the ad campaign subsequently saying, hey, this is the last hurrah for these bikes. Apparently, the general public said not so fast, and it was not the last edition. And to cover their ass, BMW is like, we were just kidding. And then for those of you who bought these bikes, here's a helmet, System 3 helmet. Good luck. And that's I'm summarizing it really loosely. That's the story behind the last edition bike. Now, Chip's motorcycle apparently was part of that production run. He'll get into the details on why it was a California edition, and as such, it has a different paint scheme. So not only a different white paint, but also different pinstripes. So he'll get into that in our discussion. And we probably should maybe right now go ahead and throw up a couple photos, since we generally don't do that when we're in the sort of podcast part of it. But what you'll see on this bike, and he'll refer to this, is we can go ahead and say it is the paint scheme, as I mentioned, is different. So instead of the pearlescent white that were on these motorcycles and the tricolor Moto Sport pinstriping, this was just sort of a police white with a black pinstripe. Mm-hmm. And you can see in the photos, he has the solo seat mounted on this motorcycle. And then also, I believe it came with the dual seat, which is not pictured in many of these photos, but I think he did send me a picture of just the dual seat cowl. You can see that on the back. And the interesting thing to note on the back of that seat cowl is it just says 100, right? And usually you'll see the model delineation there, so RS, S, yep, RT, or anything like that. So in this case, they're like, yeah, it's 100. That'll get it done. That's going to cover any sort of seat bike we're going to put this on. So there's that. And I think this bike's a real looker. I personally kind of like the sort of flat white paint and black striping as opposed to the other. But that being said, he really, I thought he did a good job getting this bike. One of the more unique, limited, I didn't even know this existed.
Right.
And the last thing we'll show up here picture-wise is the advertisement for this. And Chip alludes to this in our conversation, that BMW did note that the California editions of these motorcycles, the paint combinations may vary, I think is the language they use. So a bit of minutia and last edition trivia in this. Before we dig into it, though, Nick, you told me a great story about a last edition pair of motorcycles you nearly purchased.
Yeah, it's one of my Airhead regrets for sure. Oh, but okay. Yeah, the story goes like this. My father-in-law was living down in South Central Colorado, kind of in the mountains. Friend of a friend, rumor mill sort of situation. He mentioned that I was into Airheads. A friend told him that there was this guy out in the woods, basically, not entirely in the woods, but pretty well out there, who owned a liquor store.
His name wasn't Ted K, was it?
No, I don't even know what his name was anymore. No, and definitely not Ted Kaczynski.
Okay. Continue.
But yeah, so we're told that this guy, he owned a liquor store. We drive out to this liquor store and, the door's locked, even though the sign says that they're open. So we knock on the door. The guy lets us in. Every liquor bottle on the shelf has an inch of dust on it. I mean, I don't think he's sold a bottle in 10 years.
Strange.
The place reeks of cigarette smoke. But we get talking to this guy. Of course, we grab something off the shelf to make it look like we're going to, give him money. And we start bringing up motorcycles and BMWs, and he's kind of grumpy about it. And we let him know that we'd heard about these bikes, and he gets even grumpier because now we know his secret, right? And we thought we were going to get kicked out. But I had like a keychain or something that I kind of was like, yeah, I'm a big, vintage BMW guy. Here's the key to my bike and my keychain right here. And for whatever reason, that just kind of flipped a switch in him. And he was like, okay, we're the same people.
Okay, good.
So he's like, all right, come on back. And he opens the door that's just behind the counter, and it goes right into his home. So the liquor store is literally just a room off the side of his house. The house is just a one giant room kind of situation, kitchen. I think the bathroom was the only thing that wasn't part of the main room. And there it is. There's a last edition. I think it was an 84 RT last edition on a lift, just in his living room, covered in dust.
It was an RT or an RS?
An RT, yeah. So the bigger fairing.
Two of them?
Well, that one was right there on the lift. And then he says, all right, come over here. And he's got another lift back in the corner with another RT that was in pieces. Apparently he had been riding up a canyon and he laid it down. And so that was his bike. And the one that was all together was his brother's bike who had passed away. And so he was in the process of trying to put the broken one back together and just kind of stopped 10 years earlier. He takes us over to his pool table. All over top of the pool table, he lifts a drop cloth, and there's all the body parts for the bike that's in pieces, all freshly repainted, and it looked perfect. I mean, I don't know who he had paint these things, but they looked just like the other bike.
Pearlescence white.
It was the pearlescent, yeah, with the two-tone pinstripes.
Right.
And so, you know, we chatted for a while, and we came to a number on the bikes that, you know, if I were to say it now, it would probably
go ahead and say it.
I think he agreed to sell us both bikes for $3,500.
Oh my God, Nick! And
but I was in my 20s.
Reach through the camera and strangle.
I know.
You
And like my wife and I were saving for our first house. It was not the time, and I didn't have any money. I had a couple $100 to throw in on this deal. My father-in-law was gonna do it, and then, you know, we went home. We talked it over. He was fine with it. And I don't remember what it was, but they had to do some housework. And like within 24 hours, he's like, I can't do this right now. We'll revisit this conversation another day. And, you know, it's 8 years gone by now, and we've never revisited the conversation. But
$3,500.
Yeah. I want, it might've been $4,000, but even at loud. $4,000.
So would your father-in-law been riding one too?
He bought an Airhead. In fact, my first Airhead was his. He bought one because he knew I liked him.
I see.
And he's an enabler. And so he bought one basically to put it in my garage. In his words, you need to store this for me and make sure the fluids are fresh. Yeah. So that's actually what got me into Airheads. He never liked them. He tried riding that one. That was my R100RS, the 78 Belgian police bike. Mm-hmm. He has big feet. He was kicking the float bowls off that bike when he rode it. But he was going to buy these anyway, because he was flipping bikes at the time. Yeah. Old enduro bikes. And he thought, well, this complete one, I'll take that one and just get it running and sell it for the price of admission. And then you can have this other one as a project. And it just, you know, the deal never came together, health issues with them, and so on and so forth. And now it's way down the line, and I still want to stop by that place, but it's like, I think it's 3.5, 4 hours away from my house. So it's not exactly a like just swing by kind of scenario.
You know, there's probably a better chance than not that he still has them.
He could. And I keep telling myself, if I'm ever down that way for another reason, I'm stopping. But I
mean, it's at least 50-50, given the fact that he had never sort of advertised them and sort of the unique circumstances of where and how they were put up and put away. You just never know.
Never know.
It's fun to hear those stories and how bikes get unearthed and rediscovered.
Yep. That was my barn find that I should have jumped on.
Pool table find.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my story on that. I have often gone to sleep wishing I bought those bikes, but maybe it'll happen in the future. Speaking of last editions, we'll roll into this excerpt here and let Chip tell us about his bike. Yep. But before that, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Comment.
That's what I was trying to say. Thanks, Darren.
Make a comment.
Comment.
You've got, I guess, sort of the ancillary stories today are, you know, maybe bikes you didn't buy that you regret not buying.
Yep. We'd love to hear about them.
Hearing that and said, man, I mean, for me, it's always been the bikes I've sold, a few that I've wanted to find again, but I don't know that there are any that I've necessarily passed on. I try not.
Darren, you don't strike me as the kind of guy who doesn't buy things.
Just ask my wife.
Very cool. Well, thanks everybody. Let's roll into this excerpt. We'll see you next time.
The BMW Motorcycle Owners of America are continuing their free 1-year membership promotion for Airhead 247 podcast listeners. And we've sweetened the offer. All new members will get our limited edition Airhead 247 t-shirt and decal, which you can check out on the website, Airhead247.com. Now, we've got a limited supply of the t-shirts in various sizes, so the offer is limited to our availability. And the offer also only available to those in the continental United States. To qualify for the free 1-year membership, you must either be new to the MOA or have not experienced the MOA as a member in the last 3 years. The free 1-year membership includes 12 issues of the BMW Owner's News, an annual copy of the BMW Owner's Anonymous book, full access to the MOA site, forums, flea market, and of course, all the money-saving discounts and roadside assistance plans. To join, visit 247.bmwmoa.org and use the code Airheads247 to register for your free 1-year membership. You can find that link on our website or in the description section of any of our podcasts. A free membership to the MOA is a quick and easy way to support our efforts here. And did we mention it's free? All right, we're on the line with Chip from Iowa. Chip also posts on Adventure Rider as Big Wally, which is sort of how we became introduced, sharing news and notes on all things Airheads. And Chip has a really interesting motorcycle to talk about today. Again, it fits in the Survivor Series, but it also is among the unique limited edition releases of the Airhead 247 run. So Chip, let's get started out. Let me say hello, and let's talk a little bit about generally just your time with Airheads and what really intrigues you about the 247 Boxer.
It started after I joined the Army right out of high school for 3 years in the early 70s. And I had an Army buddy with an R60/5, and that bike impressed me a lot with its unusual engine layout, the drive shaft, reputation for reliability and durability. And I got out of the Army then in 75, having saved $1,200, and immediately spent it all on a used 71 R75/5 with about 2,000 miles on it. Black, of course, and with the big tank. And so I earned a few more bucks and added a windjammer fairing and Denfield, I believe they were, leather bags, kind of small bags.
Mm-hmm.
And that first summer, my buddy and I rode from the Midwest to Austin and San Diego to visit Army buddies. And the next year, it was on to Alaska when the Alcan was a mud road. And that was quite an adventure. So these were transformative experiences for me, the freedom of being off the farm and out of the Army and traveling on a motorcycle, which I've heard said is like being in a movie instead of watching one.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And let me ask you just a quick follow-up there. So the BMW, you mentioned you were in the Midwest. I'm just going to assume that was still maybe in Iowa or somewhere thereabouts. The Airhead, was it a popular bike, an oddball bike? I would imagine during that era in time and maybe where you were, probably more populated with Japanese or American bikes of that era and not so many BMWs, no?
There weren't a lot here then, but that changed. It was mostly Harleys and Japanese bikes,
Mm-hmm.
but after I got my bike, a bunch of my friends here in Iowa got them, and in this little bitty town of 350 people, I think there were up to a dozen of them at one time.
Wow, so you're saying you were a trendsetter back then?
Yeah, that's me. But they became popular, and a number of those guys have hung on to them and still have them. In fact, one of them he has a couple bikes, but he bought a new RS when the Last Edition series, and he still owns it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and bought a new 76 R90/6 and still owns it. So a couple other guys still have their bikes from back in the day, too.
Wow.
And, mine was black, and so was my Army buddies. And I used to say, if it ain't black, it ain't a BMW. But I'd always wanted a white one because there weren't very many of them made. And, they just caught my eye.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. So, before we talk about the bike in this particular Survivor Series, so do you have have you owned other Airheads? Obviously, you have. Maybe just tell me about those, not necessarily in succession, but so you have the /5. What else has been in your garage over the years?
Well, I had some non-Airheads for a while. I had a K100 when they first came out with a Krauser fairing on it, which was a really nice fairing. And and then I had a 650 GS after a while, and then an R1200 RT, which I still have.
Okay.
That's a real mile muncher. And then about 3 years ago, I got back into Airhead.
And now, is that where this bike we're going to talk about comes into play?
Yeah, it was actually the third Airhead I bought. The first one was about 3 or 4 years ago, was a 76 R90S in Daytona Orange.
That's right. I remember that one on ADV, and I think you just recently sold it, no?
Yeah, I sold it last year, but that's how you and I first interacted, was you had gotten one not too long before that, and you were kind of giving me some ideas on how to go about working my way through it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. That's right.
God, this is a gorgeous motorcycle.
Yeah,
And you just stop and stare. It was so beautiful. And it's kind of funny because when they first came out, I didn't like that color.
Yeah.
Buddy of mine had the silver smoke, and we all lusted after it. But now I love the Daytona Orange.
Yeah, funny how that goes. Funny how that goes.
Yeah, it is.
So let's talk about your 1984 Last Edition R100S California Edition. Do I have the moniker correct?
Yeah, you pretty well do. It's a funny thing. BMW North America in '84 had the so-called Last Edition series produced for the U.S. market, and they were essentially just special paint jobs. I don't know if there was anything else very unique about them, but they had beautiful paint jobs with that pearlescent white with the tricolor motorsport theme pinstripes. And there were like 740 of them, and 175 of them were the bullet fairing bikes, originally designated S models when they were first introduced as the 90S. And then later in 77 through 80, they became the 100S. But from 81 to 84, they became the CS, standing for Classic Sport.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So when I first saw this bike on Bring a Trailer, I was surprised by some of the things that were in the description. I thought they had to be wrong. First, it was claimed to be an S rather than a CS. And, the S had quit in 1980, so that didn't fit with my preconceived notions.
Right. Now, if I'm not mistaken, isn't that what was on the battery cover too, right?
Yeah, Last Edition R100S. So the second thing was it was police white with black pinstripes instead of pearlescent white with the tricolor pinstripes that were in all the ads. And, a buddy of mine bought an RS like that, gorgeous machines. And so that was a second puzzler.
Sure.
And then third, it was titled as an 83 rather than an 84.
Oh.
Yeah. And so the story there is in California, well, I got this information from another inmate on ADV Rider called Breakfast Rider.
Okay.
And he pointed out that in the 84 model year in California, they had new anti-pollution laws, and they wouldn't allow 84 model year bikes into California because of this new regulation the only bikes they let in had to have been built in 83. So even though they were built in the fall and winter of 83, they had to be titled as 83s because they wouldn't allow an 84 title bike into California.
Yeah, technically it was an 84 year model built in whatever month in 1983. And that's very, very common. In fact, that's generally the rule for most bikes. I mean, they were built, a lot of them were built the calendar year, many of them sometimes before the actual model year. Okay, so that's that's a lot. Those are three big sort of things, as you mentioned there. Like, okay, so what's going on now? You're really into your checking the provenance and researching all this at this point.
Yeah, I was about to, turn away from it, but I kept going back and looking at it because I loved the look. And the seller, in the discussion part on Bring a Trailer, you can ask questions, make comments, and
right.
I brought these three things to the forefront, and so did a couple other guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the seller showed the period ad that in the fine print, don't forget the fine print, it says very clearly that the R100 CS is designated an R100S in California, and that models for California will vary slightly in color scheme. So how do you challenge BMW's own printed provenance? That was pretty convincing.
Yeah. Now, do you know if that paint job was done in the States? Or did it come from Germany like that? Did you ever find out how that happened? Because I've come to understand occasionally bikes would have been occasionally resprayed, repainted or something after they came stateside or to a different market. What was the case with yours?
Well, I tried to find that and some other details out by contacting BMW North America, BMW Motor, the classic BMW group. Nobody responded. I looked in, among other places, Snowbum's encyclopedia, which the Vintage Club hosts on their website.
That's right.
And he has it right in there that this paint scheme 581, which is the sticker on my rear fender, is black pinstripes on police white, code 083, I think. Police white is, which is the same as on the Motorsport, by the way.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The white is the same, and he also mentioned 83 and 84 Last Edition as models that color scheme could be found on sometimes. So I think was paint applied by BMW, whether it was in Germany or North America. I really don't know, but Snowbum knew of the nuance, but he's from west, near California.
Yeah.
So he's in the know. He knows a lot.
I mean, that's a good source. Not a lot of people are going to question what they're reading on his site, and for good reason, especially with the paint codes. Ironically enough, I interviewed him for the program about a year or so ago. It's been a minute, but I asked him what was the most popular search on the site, and he said, hands down, it's paint codes. Which I thought was odd, but I guess after a while, no, because people are researching their bikes, they want to get the color right, they're repainting, et cetera, et cetera. All right, Chip. So let me ask you then: all this information here we're talking about, looking up the provenance, finding out the history and detail on it, were you furiously finding this out as the auction end was approaching, or was some of this stuff we're talking about currently you discovered after you purchased the bike?
Most of it I discovered after I purchased it.
Okay.
The only thing I saw prior to purchase was that BMW ad for the Last Edition series, which was convincing to me.
Yeah.
So, I went ahead and threw my hat in the ring, and late in the auction, three of my riding buddies, we stopped riding and grabbed a coffee at McDonald's during the late stages of the auction, and I was ready to fold my tent and quit. and they kept encouraging me because it was my money, not theirs.
I first became a regular customer with Boxer 2 Valve a few years ago when refreshing an R90S. William and Edward Plam's video repair series, well, that was a go-to reference. It made that job and repair session much easier and really an enjoyable process. Boxer 2 Valve carries only the highest quality parts, mainly manufactured by OEM suppliers, so the fit is perfect and the repair, well, it's done just one time. Fitment and applications for all parts are clearly listed. To quickly find what you need, you simply enter your year and model of your bike, and you'll see only the parts that fit. Shipping, that's always fast, with most orders going out that day at 2 p.m., and shipping is available to all parts of the globe. Boxer 2 Valve carries a wide variety of premium special tools and maintenance items, many of those unique to their catalog. William and Edward and the team at Boxer 2 Valve are Airhead fans, and as they say, with a passion for simpler times and uncomplicated machines. Check them out for all your parts needs, boxer2valve.com. That's the number 2, boxer2valve.com. One of the great things about owning a classic 247 is taking pride in maintaining and repairing the motorcycle yourself. For some of us, yours truly included, there are some jobs that are better left to specialists. For me, transmission repair, that is one of those jobs. Airhead transmissions, they're mostly robust until they're not. Then, eventually, they're going to need some attention. That's where George Thomas and Air Support BMW come in. From repairing broken shift dogs, pawl springs, or adding a circlip, Air Support BMW knows how to repair your transmission and get it right the first time. Maybe you want to add a shorter first gear and taller fifth to your GS, or updating the shift kit on an older model to an improved later setup. George and Air Support BMW has got you covered. To get a quote on transmission repair or any other mail-in driveline repair, check in with George at airsupportbmw.com. Yeah, let's just talk about the buying process there, and let's join back in as it's happening. So you're at McDonald's, you're getting a coffee, the auction's coming to an end, and how many other bidders were hot to trot?
Well, hot to trot, it usually comes down to 2.
Yeah.
It did in this case. You know, there were half a dozen leading up to the end, but at the end there were 2, and he'd keep bumping it by $300. I'd only bump it by the minimum 100, and he finally gave up. He must have had more considerate friends than I did with it.
Did you have a budget in mind? Did you have a number in mind? And if so, did you go over it?
Yes, I went over it.
Good for you.
With encouragement from my friends.
Good for you. And was it much more over it?
Well, about $1,500 over it. So, you know, it was still under 10 grand, which is plenty for a 40-year-old bike. But, you know, I'm happy I got it.
Is that what do you mind saying what was the hammer price? If you don't, I mean, people can look it up on BAT, but what was it?
It was $9,500.
Wow. That seems like a really good buy, Chip, all things considered.
Well, it seemed like a lot to me at the time, but there have been some Daytona Orange 90S's go for big dollars there. And,
yeah.
You know, it's well, and then it depends on who's in the bidding. There are some guys that seem to have limitless funds.
That's true. I mean, thankfully, I haven't been on that site as much as I used to in recent months. But yeah, there were some guys, you know, just basically throwing wallets around like there was no tomorrow. So thankfully, whoever those were not watching that motorcycle when you were trying to buy it.
That's right. They weren't. And at least one guy in recent times has been populating a museum somewhere, and he's been buying up everything, and nobody outbids him. So you got to be on your toes, I guess.
That's right. So, curiously, since we're just talking about this, how was the experience after the auction ended? Going, dealing with Bring a Trailer and the seller and all that stuff, because so often in this program we talk about looking at this. We're talking about it almost in third person. I mean, we're commenting on the sales and the prices, and not a whole lot of people, maybe other than David Lee, who was on here, have really been involved in it. He as a seller, so as a buyer, the auction ends. Just talk me through that. How was the remainder of the process?
The auction ends, and then you and the seller are put in contact with each other. You don't know who the seller is, other than it's his alias. So then you get in contact with each other, and you arrange payment and shipping of the bike, in this case, because it came from California clear to Iowa. And that's pretty much how it goes. And I really had very little contact with Bring a Trailer themselves until I got the bike and discovered that the seller had misrepresented a few things.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, you take your chances.
You're right.
So I contacted the seller and tried to sort it out with him, and that went nowhere. So I brought it to Bring a Trailer's attention and had some pretty strong evidence. And they were actually quite good about it.
Really?
Without my even asking them to, they refunded my 5% buyer's fee. Buyers pay most of the freight on these exchanges.
Yeah.
Seller only pays $100, I think, and the buyer pays 5%. So, I was pleasantly surprised that they did that.
Can you say what some of the misrepresentations were?
I'll give you one example.
Okay.
I had asked during the auction, do the heated grips work? And he said, yeah, they work great. Well, when I got the bike, one worked great and one didn't work at all. And I took it apart, and the wiring inside the handlebar now, where nobody could get at it, was broken and corroded over the end. So that had been non-functional for a long time.
Yeah, and so he knew it. Or he or she, let's just say, the seller knew it.
Well, the seller either knew it or should have known it, because he said they worked great.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever tried them, but they couldn't. One of them could not possibly have worked.
Interesting. So you tell BAT about this, and they were proactive on trying to make it right for you.
They were, and there were other misrepresentations. That's just one example, but I wanted them to know about it. It never occurred to me to ask for a refund, but I wanted them to know about it in case this seller was going to list more bikes on the auction. And as it turns out, he has. And Bring a Trailer's position was, well, just because he did it once doesn't mean he'll do it every time. And
jeez,
so,
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. Okay, so final thing then on this. Well, maybe not the final thing, but one of the follow-ups. Then, did you have a conversation with the seller about this? Where you're like, hey, dude, the grip doesn't work, and it's pretty obvious it didn't work. Or did you just let it get resolved through Bring a Trailer, cut your losses, and enjoy the bike?
Well, I first took it up with the seller.
Yeah, okay.
Out of it, tried to sort it out with the seller. And, he just stonewalled and tried to blame it on the shipper. They got rust with the handlebars during shipping or something. Well, wires inside the handlebars.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah. So anyway, that and the other issues got nowhere. So Bring a Trailer, stepped up, and I've moved on. I'm happy I've got the bike.
Yeah.
Deal killer kind of issues. It's just really annoying when someone misrepresents like that.
100%. And there's really no explaining it. I mean, you're putting up a motorcycle for sale with your name behind it, even though you're an anonymous seller, so to speak. But As you mentioned, he or she, whoever it is, has gone on to sell other motorcycles there in the past or after that. Not only is it bad business practice, I think it's bad karma. However it goes, that's how it goes. All right, so you got all that ironed out. What was the mileage on the bike when you bought it, and how many numbers have you turned on it since?
I bought it in the fall of 22, and it had a little less than 39,000 miles. And now it's got between 45 and 46,000. So I ride it a lot.
Yeah, good for you.
It's my daily ride.
And so I guess it's fair to say that, and it was I don't want to say a daily rider, but obviously it was not a museum piece or a garage queen when you bought it with that kind of mileage on there. Does the sort of patina and the condition of the bike show that, or was it really exceptionally well cared for?
I'd say it was in very good condition. There are a few paint chips, which are pretty much unavoidable, and the crossover pipes need to be replaced. But other than that, cosmetically, it was in very good condition. And in my view, it's a real looker, and not a 10-foot bike. It's a bike you can walk right up close and look at with a great deal of care and not be disappointed.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that it already had some miles on it and had been ridden makes it a little bit easier to take it out and enjoy it and ride it rather than, buying a uber low mileage bike and, getting nervous about going out and putting the miles on it. So what, aside from the uniqueness of this bike, the paint scheme we talked about, this was a limited, probably in many regards, Chip. I mean, who knows how many of these were actually, this particular model were produced. It's one of question mark, I guess. Yeah,
not known, but my speculation is that of 175 bikes, bullet-bearing bikes, that if California got 10% of them based on their proportional population, then there might be 15 to 20 of these California variants out there. And I did see another one online that I think must have been a California variant, and it was pearlescent white with tricolor pins, but on the battery covers it said Last Edition R100S.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So the mystery deepens.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery here. I got nothing with the bike except the title. No certificate of origin.
Yeah.
No ownership history. No mechanical history. So I knew it was going to, take some more work to get it assuredly safely rideable. And, you usually got to deal with all the usual suspects that leak in the engine and the front of the transmission and all that. And I did, and found a few other things that needed some significant work. And it's been a good learning curve for me, digging in and doing this work.
Yeah, so that was the next thing I was going to ask you. So maybe you had to reseal the top end, push rod, tube seals, maybe, I don't know, new neutral Swiss. Did you have to go in as deep as the rear main seal or anything like that as far as oil leaks?
Yeah, the shelves, a lot of oil on it. So I pulled the transmission actually out of the bike and did the rear main seal, the little O-ring on the other piece there with the flywheel,
right?
Oil pump O-ring. But the real bad leak was from the transmission input shaft seal. That's pretty easy replacement too.
It is.
Went through all that. Had to rebuild the front brake calipers and replace the master cylinder. That whole master cylinder system was just full of petrified brake fluid. I don't know how the guy was riding it. You made a riding video, and there was almost no front brake there.
Well, I mean, if you would have asked him, I'm sure he would have said the front brake works fine.
And when I took the tire off, the tube had a real narrow constriction followed by a real herniated spot. I mean, that looked like a tube waiting to blow.
Good grief.
Yeah. So replaced exhaust crossover pipes, rebuilt the rear brake, some of those things, of course, tires and battery. But, I learned a lot in the process and would have no hesitation digging in to do another one.
Yeah. And two things. I mean, anybody who buys a bike of that era, we've talked about it here a lot. I mean, part of the experience and enjoyment and fun, if you will, of owning a bike like that is to go through it and spend some time. For me, it's in the winter months. I'm sure that's probably when you did a lot of that work. When in the downtime and in a warm garage. So there's that experience. And then secondarily, it's important to know for the rider, your case, my case, all the systems have been checked. I'm comfortable with the way everything is. I know this bike in and out pretty well now, and I'm going to feel comfortable taking it on a long trip or doing whatever. That's also the reason to go through that. Now, there are a lot of guys who would buy a bike like that and maybe just do the minimum amount. Now, I don't know that you could have skipped over a lot of those systems, for instance, with the oil leak and the caliper. But there's another thought, and it's just as fine and valid as say, hey, look, I'm just going to fit. The bike will tell me what needs to be fixed, and that's what I'm going to do at a minimum. But it sounds like this was, you say, kind of a learning process for you. Wintertime project. Let's take the bike down to the areas I'm comfortable with. And, maybe the real, some things didn't need replaced. The leak on the shelf could have just been the input shaft seal. I've seen that before, but you've got the transmission out. Of course, you're going to replace the rear main seal once you've gone in that far. So anything, other surprises, modifications or changes you've done? It sounds like you kept it pretty original and haven't done a whole lot other than just repair what needed attention.
Here's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
I was listening to your podcast with Rick Jones at Motorrad Electric.
Yeah.
And decided to buy his classic boxer charging book because electrics are just a complete mystery to me. And almost immediately after I finished reading and highlighting practically everything in the book, my generator light started to glow.
Of course it did.
Yeah. So I followed his diagnostic process, found the diode board was failing and was probably going to go within the next ride or two. And the stator resistances were out of spec. And so I put in one of the 600-watt Omega systems. And so there was great timing on that particular podcast.
Perfect. That was one of the earlier ones, too. I think that was the third or fourth one we had done. So good. I'm glad that worked out. And, yeah, Rick, a great guy, no doubt about it. That book has saved a lot of people, a lot of heartache and frustration, myself included.
Yep.
And I actually went down and visited with him. I bought a K-bike, a K75 in Alabama, that he had done some work on, and went down and visited with him in his shop, and really, really enjoyed it. He's a stand-up fella.
That charging system came with very good instructions. And between instructions from, a guy like that and help from ADV Rider inmates and YouTube and Snowbum, it gives you a little greater confidence to tackle some of these things. And if you take good notes while you're doing it, you can go back. If you ever have to do something else, you've got a pretty good template there to get a good head start with.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So aside from, and this, I don't want to say aside, but obviously the paint scheme on this, the pinstripes and all that stuff are the unique features about this bike. Are there other things particular of this era S or RS, whatever you want to call it? It's a S, really, that speak to you, that are unique about this particular bike? I mean, I know if you had ridden an earlier twin shock /7 RS, the motor might have been tuned a little bit differently from the factory. It had bigger carburetors, horsepower was maybe a little bit more. The valve seats were on the earlier ones were not problematic. All that being said, did this bike have that same sort of RS sport feel or S feel that you were expecting, specifically compared to the 90 that you owned?
It actually feels and rides appreciably different than the 90S. The 90S had more grunt. It had higher compression. It had the big Delorto pumper carbs. It had a lower rear end. So it was a faster bike. The 100S is, a lower compression bike, but it's got longer legs, shifts much better, and has much better front brakes than the 90S.
Interesting. So a unique bike in its own way and how it handles and performs.
Yeah. My RS, I've got an 84 RS, and it feels very different, not just from the fairing, but just everything feels so much more plush on the RS, and this S feels more analog, more visceral kind of. I can't really explain it. Well, it's got a heavier clutch, the heavy-duty clutch diaphragm spring, so it's got a stronger clutch pull. It's got fatter grips and so forth, and a little stiffer suspension. So it feels less refined, really, than the RS.
Interesting.
But, yeah, they're very similar mechanically, but they feel quite different riding to me.
So one other thing that was in that vintage BMW feature that you did, there was a nice picture of, I guess it was an 84 police model bike. And you mentioned the paint code on yours is that police white code. And that particular photo was from I guess it was the 83 James Bond film Octopussy, which, having just read that article and seen that picture, I went back and watched it just the other day. And
oh, yeah.
yeah, I mean, oh, gosh. It's amazing how misogynistic those movies were.
Oh.
Nobody thought twice about it back then. I'm watching it with my wife, and she's just like, really? I mean, but anyway, it was a different time and era. I digress. I mention all that to say it was neat to see that photo. I forgot that motorcycle was in there, and it's, again, another BMW 247 in a James Bond film. Do you remember where the Daytona Orange 90S, what film that was in? Not a Bond film, but a 70s film just the same. Do you recall?
No.
It's in the Pink Panther, 1975. I want to say Pink Panther Returns or Strikes Again. And I should know.
Great series of movies. Peter Sellers was a scream.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I should know that because I've watched it so many times. I want to say it's the Return of the Pink Panther. Whatever one was in 75, one of the characters in there toodles around and shows up to a drag bar in a Daytona Orange 90S. And the other neat thing about it, Chip, is anybody who goes back and watches that film, they use the actual sound of the Boxer motorcycle. So often in a movie, they'll just put, generic engine noises and something like that. And you can tell unequivocally, 100%, that's the actual motorcycle sound. It's undeniable, very distinguishable of the Boxer motor. So something to look up. Both Octopussy, Pink Panther, and then I think Romancing the Stone. There was Michael Douglas had a RT or an RS, and there may be a couple others I'm missing. But if you're watching old movies from the 70s, always keep your eye out in the background because something's going to pop up. I think Star Trek, one of the Star Treks, had a police RT in it as well. So a neat bit of trivia there.
This law enforcement bike in Octopussy they're cool. I mean, they've got these real long front fenders, leather bags, a radio kit behind the rider with an antenna. Very built. And, I was almost moved to name this bike based on encountered stiff resistance.
Yeah, it's an unusual name, that film. I agree. All right, so getting back to this whole idea then of why we connected here on the phone call today, the idea of a Survivor Series bike. First of all, I want to ask you, in your mind, what makes a Survivor Series or an original bike like we're talking about?
Well, when you mentioned the Survivor Series, there was no definition per se, but what came to my mind was a bike that still has all or mostly all original paint, matched engine and frame numbers, of course, and is still in reasonably good cosmetic and mechanical condition. And the closer to stock, the better, I think. But I even make modifications. Like on this white bike, I put bar end mirrors because I'm so disgusted with the rear view for most of BMW's mirrors.
Yeah.
So, I'm not opposed to modifications that are functional. But I think it's likely that a bike will become a survivor. It's more likely to become one if a small number of riders have owned it for long periods of time.
Good point. I had never thought about that. That's a really good point.
I think it's more likely to be a well-preserved machine under those circumstances.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that's really true. One thing I'm always intrigued about by original paint, original condition bikes, and those are really, Chip, of what I've leaned towards purchasing over the years. I think everything I have now in the garage is an original paint bike, or at least I have the original bodywork. I think the one exception is the GS I have, the first generation GS. Yeah, I have. It was originally delivered in the blue, the dark blue, Dunkelblau, whatever they call it, and I still have the tank fenders, battery covers, and stuff. But I've since switched it to the Paris-Dakar kit. But all that being said, that type of motorcycle in that condition has always intrigued me. And if for no other reason, like you mentioned, there's something about a bike like that probably has a good owner history. Although with yours, that might be a little bit in question, knowing about the seller. All that being said, though, I like the idea of getting on a bike like that and almost being transported back in time to when it was originally built and delivered. Because once you paint it, change it, alter it, that feeling and ability to go back to, in your case, fall of 1983 or whenever that bike was built, it loses a little bit. And to have everything all original, see the paint and know the history and provenance behind it, to me, it's a little bit like a time machine.
Yeah, a lot of us geezers have a long history with these bikes. And you have in your mind's eye what they looked like then, and look like that's what they should look like now.
Well, look, Chip, it's been really fun visiting with you today. I think you did really well purchasing that bike, a very unique model. Again, folks can find you on Adventure Rider at Big Wally. Is your moniker there. And if you're in the BMW Vintage Club, check out the October 22 edition, which is archived online. You can see the write-up there. And we'll be doing a feature on this for the BMW Owners News at some point in the Survivor Series as well. So, Chip, thanks for the time. Take care, buddy.
You too, Darren. Adios.
Thanks for joining us on the Short Wheelbase Podcast, presented by the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. To join the club, visit bmwmoa.org. You can find full-length episodes of the excerpts heard here on the Airhead 247 podcast. The Short Wheelbase Podcast is produced and edited by Nick Malozzi. Audio segments by Jeff Glover. You can check in with Nick at Airhead Misfits on Instagram.